Hello and welcome to Squatting Puffin.
But Puffin...
We haven't even started yet, shut it! So this script was written way back when it was new news that yet another socialist YouTuber, Hassan had just bought $1 million mansion. But then Labor Day came up and my mistake with Grover Cleveland happened, and then I caught COVID and was out for a while, and, well, I did promise this video, so let's get started with a couple stories. First, imagine a conservative Christian missionary preaching in a country that is flooded with brothels and prostitution. He spends his days preaching about how immoral this all is, and how it needs to change and that the people should repent. In this country, all food is bought and sold and served in the brothels, so in order to survive, he enters the brothels to eat. This is completely understandable and necessary for him to live. All rooms for rent are also associated with the brothels, so he has to rent rooms from the brothels in order to not be left homeless. While some extreme detractors might mock him for this, it is also understandable given that shelter is necessary for survival and a cardboard box underneath the bridge isn't the safest place to live. He then begins hiring prostitutes for evening, activities, all the while still preaching how evil and immoral those actions are. Could you blame the people for calling him a hypocrite at that point? But how is that hypocritical, he shouts? After all, food and rent are both only found in the brothels. But that's not what the people are mocking him for now, is it? That's not even to say whether his message was wrong or right, simply that he has provided them with no reason to trust him. Second, imagine a horrible schoolyard filled with bullies. As soon as you enter the playground, someone shakes you down for your lunch money, leaving you lunch moneyless. And the only way you'll feed yourself is by also bullying others for their money. You go out there to preach pacifism and kindness and telling everyone that bullying is wrong and the only reason you bully is because you need lunch to live as well, but you promise that the way you preach is better for everyone if only everyone would follow it. But once you get good at surviving, you find yourself getting enough lunch money to hold a cafeteria Thanksgiving feast each day, like the head bullies that you have been so critical of. While you still talk about how you wish people were kinder to each other, and heck, you might even give away a roll or a carton of milk every once in a while, you still bully other kids for your feast every day. Some people could say you don't really care about kindness. Sure, you talk a lot about it, and do token acts of kindness, but only after you have bullied far more than you need to in order to get by. Sitting in front of your stacks of pizza and meatloaf, you tell everyone how much nicer the schoolyard would be if they simply didn't bully each other, and then you reach over and punch a kid out for 2 more quarters. No one is going to care what you're saying. You're a hypocrite. It's one thing on this playground to bully enough to eat, or even to bully your way to a modest but comfortable meal. It's something else entirely to bully your way into a feast like the big bullies every day. Hold on to these 2 stories. We'll get back to them. Let's talk basic economics. While I bury the lead deeper than a body, the mob once disappeared. Way back in the early days of economics, they had no idea why things had the prices they did. But Puffin, don't sellers just set their prices? Well, technically yes, but the true price of something is what you can actually sell it for. That's what we care about here, its actual value. If I sat down next to a farmer's market and tried to sell a plain apple for $1 million, no one would buy it because that's not the actual value of apples. Adam Smith, the father of economics and the writer of The Wealth of Nations, theorized, along with many others, that the value of something came from the labor put into it. A tall tree is less valuable than fine-cut lumber, and fine-cut lumber is less valuable than a masterfully hand-carved dresser. And on a surface level, it makes sense. It's also wrong, but we'll talk about that later if we have some time, because now it's time to talk about Marx, and Marx needs the labor theory of value for his socialist oppression story to work. Marx came onto the scene in the 1800s and said, well, if all value comes from labor, then why are business owners so rich? They aren't doing the labor that makes the dressers, but they're making all the money. He concluded that what must be happening is that the business owners were basically gathering peasants together, handing them tools and saying, I'll take all the value your labor produces and give you back a sliver to make you feel validated. So all the profits, according to Marx, were theft from the duped laborers. He called that profit, quote, surplus value, unquote, of the laborers. This is why socialism, especially Marxist socialism, wants the means of production made public. Because according to him, the only reason the business owner can do this is because he arbitrarily owns the hammer and chisel to make the dresser, like he was born with it or something. So, why do people call Bernie Sanders a hypocrite when he owns 3 mansions, even though he lives in a capitalist nation and still needs a place to live? Why do people call Hassan or the OK Boomer Girl hypocrites after preaching socialism and then buying their multi-million-dollar residences off the profits? I'll link a video of Vosh accidentally explaining it best when he says, yes, they should be doing something with that money, but... Vosh then tried to dig his way out of the hole, but he discovered he actually built an argument to contend with instead of the straw man he thought he was. And he's not always great at dealing with non-straw men. But he's right. Based on their moral framework, the profits made from book sales or from Patreon subscriptions are theft, and thus have to be given back. If they really believed in socialism, they should be doing something else with it. They are taking the labor from others, and it's a fair argument, if true, that, quote, well, under capitalism, you have to do that to survive. But, just like the pacifist bully didn't have to keep stealing lunch money until he was fat, or the conservative Christian missionary didn't have to engage in fornication, the socialists don't have to keep taking profits until they live in mansions, while there are still many homeless in the country. And they seem to understand this point of their moral framework right up until they become rich.
But, Puffin, that's a voluntary exchange. How could something be theft if it's voluntary? I mean, honestly.
Capitalists ask socialists that exact same question all the time, and the response is, well, there's a power imbalance. For example, I was once told, well, I want an iPhone, but the only way to get it is to make a sacrifice to Apple on the altar of capitalism. If they didn't have that power over that object, I could choose. How is that any different from I wanted to read what Bernie Sanders had to say, but then he charged money for his book instead of publishing it online for free? A common socialist refrain at this point is, if you don't think it's wrong, why are you complaining about it? Much like the detractors of the Christian missionary who paid for prostitutes, we're not complaining, we're just pointing out that you're not living up to your standard. So why should we listen when you say your way is better? And it happens every time. If socialism is so much better than capitalism, prove it by actually living it as best you can, instead of just talking about it. Oh, don't get me wrong, there were mansions under socialism, but you're not proving anything by living the way Stalin, Pol Pot, Ho Chi Minh, Mao, Lenin, Mugabe, or Fidel Castro did under socialism. People aren't worried about how the leaders live under socialism, they're worried about how the people under those leaders had to live. So, as a leader in your own movement, lead it by living it. But maybe, just maybe, you actually are living what you believe, and we are not wrong about the corrupt, selfish nature of socialism.
But, Puffin!
Oh, fine, I've still got some time to burn. Guess I'd better live up to the promise I made earlier about why the labor theory of value is wrong. Okay, this is a topic that I could probably take a full video on, but I don't have time for a full video on it right now, so let's just do a crash course. Economists for a long time have wondered why things cost the way they do. The original economists theorized maybe the amount of labor it takes to make something increases the price by some arbitrary amount per labor hour. This theory has been around since the dawn of economics, and holding to it is a little like how the Catholic Church held on to the geocentric model of the universe, despite the evidence presented by Galileo and Copernicus. And just like the labor theory of value crowd, their only rebuttal was, but we have a mostly working model, despite how it couldn't account for any of the anomalies that the heliocentric model answers. Nonetheless, Marxists claim to be able to prove it mathematically, even though it requires the same fit the numbers to the outcomes quote-unquote predictive math that flat earthers have to use to explain their change of seasonal temperatures model. There were several other theories that came out over the years, including utility theory, which is that value comes from how useful something is, but water is the absolute most useful thing to life, and it's way cheaper than a diamond, which is just a really luxurious rock. So, most people with gray matter don't believe utility theory. There's also marginal utility theory, where the value of something is based sometimes on other uses for the items. So water might be more important to life, but there's some outstanding pleasure that people get from owning a diamond. That's why it costs more. But the issue with these theories is that they all posit a hard value. They cannot account for why anyone would choose not to buy something. Then, there's the subjective theory of value that most modern economists believe. The theory is just that value is not an inherent trait of anything, but that it is subjective to each individual, which is why a gallon of water is more valuable to someone dying of thirst than a diamond is. And since value is subjective and trades are voluntary, the reason both people are willing to trade is because they both view the thing the other person has as more valuable to them. Apple sells you iPhones because they want your money more than they want their phones. And you buy iPhones because you want the iPhone more than the money they're asking for it. Otherwise, you wouldn't be willing to buy it. There is a cost to labor. Labor is a commodity for sale like anything else, but adding labor to something does not inherently increase its value. If I took a board of finely prepared lumber from a tree that was watered by hand every day and that had 100 men lovingly massaging its branches every night and ground it into wood pulp, it would suddenly be worth less than the fine piece of lumber it used to be, despite all the excessive labor that was put into it. because people would often rather have a nice piece of lumber than wood shavings, or at least subjectively value one above the other. This is also why not every product works on the market. If the labor and resources to produce something create a greater cost than the value of the thing, it doesn't sell, because the value doesn't come from the labor but from the desires of individuals. This is why the boss makes money, because the labor of a skilled CEO who can run a company, juggle priorities, and execute a plan to keep the company from dying in a stressful, competitive market is valued higher than the one of 300 who can put the board in the machine to make it smoother. This is why capitalists don't care that Hassan has a mansion. He traded his cash for a house, and now he has a house that he wanted, more than his $2.7 million. And the seller has $2.7 million that he wanted more than the house he designed and built. The socialist millionaires are mocked because they willingly choose the comforts and benefits of capitalism, because deep down they know they were wrong, but they continue to grift because it's what got them there in the first place. It is the hypocrisy of striving to convert the world to their religion, while flagrantly not even trying to live it themselves. And so, we mock them. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like if you didn't hate it, subscribe if you don't hate me, and share this with people you know, because I'm not good enough for YouTube to share things for me. Also, leave a comment, because that's how YouTube knows that the video is good enough for them to share it. Also, I have a Patreon if you want to be a patron of my content. I don't expect you to support me, but if you wanted to help out, at the middle tier you can get yourself a mug with butt puffin on it, and it would really help me get some of the production equipment that I lack. Take care, and I'll see you next time.